Our premise was that the ethical and aesthetic values are in fact the essence of European society. And that was a premise that we established already 20 years ago, and this has been the same over the years. And we feel that culture is the core of society, and their creativity is the source of human existence. We also felt when we founded this that it's important in the globalized society that the voices of independent artists could be heard as a balance to, let's say, the influence of technocracy. So these were the important basics for founding the European Culture Parliament. And it was important from the very outset that we have a relatively even distribution of members from all parts of Europe, not only the European Union, but also neighboring countries. And we have, I would dare to say, you yourself are a member. I'm very happy for that, Gintautas. And we have an excellent group of members, I would say. We are meeting normally once a year, and we are very happy to be planning for our next session to take place in Kaunas.
Yeah, I would add to my question, some comparative cases, The same movement was organized by Polish dissidents with the title Kultura, in French in the Soviet time in period. And for Lithuanians, it's very famous group Santara Šviesa, as well mobilized cultural philosophers in America, United States, and they laid back to Lithuania. And European Cultural Parliament does very similar things, but in all European continent. I mean that try to defend democratic values, freedoms in many of countries, as well in Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, and as well some Caucasus republics. And my question, how do you see the role of defending of democratic values, artistic values as well, as for supporting of artists in contemporary, for example, Russia?
Well, that role has always been important. We know from history, after all, that for several hundred years, the most excellent artists and authors and composers and so on were very often in opposition to any government, so the Tsar regime or to Stalin or to any other communist leader, and today against Putin. So I think that is a strong Russian tradition. Many of these personalities have suffered. They have several years in Siberia, etc. Many of them have even died. So unfortunately, it is a long historic tradition. And I must say that the members that we have today, all with Russian citizenship, you know them, and you know that they are excellent, independent, liberal, democratic persons who are really very upset about the present situation.
And what is that possibilities for cultural parliament to support these artists, in Belarus and Russia in this one case, and how we could help for Ukrainians? For example, in current time, we planned with Tomas Kavaliauskas to have some translation with Oleg Butsenko, member of ACP in Kiev. but unfortunately we lost connections with him the last week, you know. There are some difficulties as well because, you know, this bombing of Kiev and surrounding siege of Kiev. And how do you think how we can help and how ACP could helps for this at least members, if not only for artists?
The only way we can do is through keeping together and making declarations, as we did a few days ago, last Saturday, as a matter of fact, where we protested strongly against the invasion, of course, you know, the ECP does not have a big secretariat. As a matter of fact, you are speaking to the whole secretariat right now.
And no, I know it.
So it means that our resources to go in, let's say, physically to help, they are limited. But we are absolutely always encouraging the individual members to keep their position. You know, we have some tragic examples of ECP members. Anna Politkovskaya was a member of the ECP. And she was a very appreciated member, of course. She was participated in a few sessions, and then she was killed in 2006. Another member which we have is Kirill Serebrennikov, who is also having big difficulties right now with house arrest and so on. So we have the tradition of having very independent, liberal, democratic members also from these countries. We also have from Belarus, 1 or 2 persons. They are in exile from Belarus. They are not in Minsk now, but they, of course, still are very engaged for the freedom of people, and not least the artistic people, cultural people in Belarus. And as far as Ukraine is concerned, you mentioned Alexander. He sent me a reaction to this, to our statement. I think I received this last Sunday, so 3 days ago. But I don't know if things have become worse for him since then. You know, that is, of course, a possibility. We also have the great poet Yuri Andrushovich as a member, and we have Katya Botanova, and so they are strong members, and they have they feel at least that they have the support of all the other 150 plus members.
Yes, Karl, it's very important that what you say, that we don't have strong or even administration because we are a free community. You know, that's for Lithuanians, it could be quite clear because that liberal movement, Santara Šviesa, which is very similar to cultural parliament, never had any secretariat, and everything depends from the individual initiatives and from individual leadership roles, you know, on the event for the supporting of activism, you know, and liberties. So it's very, I would say, it's very understandable. And my question is, how do you find, if you would like, how do you find the importance to co-create cultural parliament? What do you think? Why such community of free intellectuals as well artists are important for Europe? Even especially in this one days?
Well, I think that is networking is extremely important in these days, and I was very happy to see that when we have made our declaration and sent it around, that a large number, I think more than 50%, have said, I am distributing this message to my network. So the networking effect, both through social media and through normal email and so on, has strong effects. So I think there are many snowball effects here from one simple declaration. And as you may remember, we have done similar things before when individual artists were threatened in Russia or Belarus and so on, and we have made it clear where the cultural actors in Europe stand.
Yeah. Carlo, I remember, I would like to remember for our listeners, Olga Sparaga, one of my friend, very good friend and professor, as well. She's emigrated to Berlin, to Germany. But before it, she was supporter of Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya and all these meetings in Minsk, and later she was arrested and jailed, and we wrote letters for the Lukashenko and his administration. Actually, not only we, but many of us, very different. We help to liberate her, and this is good. This is very good example how we are working together in Europe.
Yeah, that is an excellent example, and we have, of course, the good thing today in the present situation is that it really seems that the whole world, in all walks of life, are unanimous in their condemnation of this invasion. So I think I cannot remember any time really in my life where the world was so united for this issue. So that is a very strong message indeed.
I think that it will be very interesting to invite to session to Kaunas, some Russian artists, if it will be possible. I understand that it's quite problematic because visas, blockade, war situation, but maybe some of them could come from abroad, in any way to support these artists and their activism in Russia, because it's the only one way to stop Putin from the prolongation of war and from nuclear war, even threats.
Yeah, I think it is a very good idea to invite, and that is in your hands, of course, since it is going to happen in the.
We will discuss, but you know that the Baltic countries are very similar to Central Eastern Europe now. They are under. They feel anxiety in front of this Russian aggression, and they would like to stop any Russians initiative, which is as well understandable from the one side, but from the other side, I think we need to continue to support Russian opposition.
Yeah, absolutely, and we have the means to do that, indeed, because every member of the ECP, and as I always say, the ECP is its members. And every member has a strong network and the possibilities, even with some links to governments and media and other influential sources. So I think we should absolutely use the opportunity of our session in September in Kaunas to make some strong messages.
But probably we will do that together with Tomas Kavaliauskas, more translations with our members of ACP. This is my as well idea to invite more of them to comment for Lithuanians, for Baltic countries, for Europe, about our own opinion, to have some, if you like, platform, video platform for the spreading of our ideas. But I see that Thomas has some question. Tommy?
Perhaps I would like to move slightly towards kind of a metaphysical question. I noticed in one of your speeches that you mentioned the Russian soul as a Ruskaya dusha, as a unique thing. And my fear is that because of this war, especially very cruel war, as it turns out, because of the strategy of Russian generals and Putin, I'm afraid that the world of culture is no longer psychologically able to look at Russia as this Ruskaya Dusha country, as a Russian soul country, this is another horrible thing that now the association of this country becomes with the inhumane cruelty. But also in your speech, when you mentioned the Russian soul as something unique, you also mentioned that Europe has its soul. And because we have so many different countries, so many different cultures, what could that possibly be, European cultural soul?
Yeah, that is a big question. But well, first on the Ruskaya, I share your concern about the destiny or the future of Ruskaya Dusha, since everybody is now, and particularly in a world of social media, which is rather superfluous after all, that everybody will associate Russia rather with Putin and the generals and the military invasion, rather than with the arts and music and the philosophy, etc. And that is a big risk. I assume that in times of Stalin, for instance, Ruskaya Dusha was also suffering a lot, not only because millions of people were killed, but also because the whole world was identifying Russia with Stalin. And they forgot perhaps that Shostakovich was there and Solzhenitsyn was working, etc., etc. So there's always this risk, and particularly, of course, in a dictatorship. So the only way is, as Gintautas said, we have to have contact with the Russian and encourage Russian oppositional artists and thinkers, so that they can let's say keep holding the contents of the Russian soul. As far as the European soul, this is I'm basing here also on a rather historic fact. There were, as you know, there were times before the First World War when you could travel around all over Europe without passport. The passports, they came then from the First World War and on, and then the new European Union, of course, introduced the Schengen Agreement, where the passports went away again. But the period before the First World War is very interesting because it was really all European, pan-European. The best example of it, I would say, is the Stefan Zweig, who wrote his wonderful book, The World of Yesterday, Memories of a European, the last thing that he published before he died in 1942. And that is very much a European who is referring to both the classics and to the European philosophers of the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, and to everything we have in common, including the wish to establish a democratic society and to live in a free society with freedom of speech and freedom of movement, etc. So all these ideas are there in Europe. You could say they are parallel, more or less, with the American development, because the French Revolution and the American Constitution both came in the 1780s. But from then on, we have this will of freedom and human rights and democracy as a prevailing message. So this is what I would usually call the European values, and sometimes even the European soul. And we are all kind of, in the best of worlds, we are part of it, all of us.
Former member of ACP, Unfortunately, he's gone. Leonidas Donskis as well very discussed a lot about Stefan Zweig, and this his the last book, and he explained Romain Rolland and Stefan Zweig as two examples of European spirit. But my question is, I would like to turn to cultural diplomacy. That you are involved not only in ACP, but as well you act as a cultural diplomacy teacher, and the activist as well. What does mean for you cultural diplomacy, and how this activity is related with the understanding of cultural soul?
Well, first of all, one word. You mentioned my dear friend, Mr. Donskis, who was really a very wonderful person, a real European, and who was one of the most important person in the beginning, the first 10 years of the existence of the European Culture Parliament. So thank you for reminding us about him. About culture diplomacy. It is, a concept which neither of us used really 30 years ago. People started about 20 years ago to use this concept for anything which is based on soft power rather than hard power. So, for instance, when we discuss Russia today and we discuss, well, Putin's invasion now, that is the hard power, of course, and the Ruskaya Dusha and our dear friends who are architects and stage directors, etc. They are the Russian soul, soft power. Now, so culture diplomacy became a concept then because certain former diplomats and academics started using this concept in order to explain what other factors than the hard power are relevant in order to build bridges between various cultures. You should have in mind that culture diplomacy comes more or less at the same time as various, both in academia and in media, you start speaking about the clash of civilizations based on Huntington's books. So it is a kind of a counter movement to that one. Rather than having clashes of civilization, we should have culture diplomacy and try to build bridges and try to build trust between various nations and regions and cultures. So that was one of the reasons. And of course, for instance, my institute here in Berlin is referring to culture diplomacy as promoting democracy, human rights, particularly. So it is there is also a history of culture diplomacy, although nobody discussed it before. We remember, and you will remember, that when we had in the 1950s the terror balance, so-called, was started, and the people were very worried about the nuclear balance between United States and the Soviet Union at the time. And then some initiatives were taken in order to build a kind of a cooperation based on the concept peaceful coexistence. And as you will remember, there was a lot of exchange ballets to the United States and Louis Armstrong and jazz bands to Eastern Europe, and thousands and thousands of students and researchers going in both directions, and quite significant budgets were mobilized for this kind of exchange. When the Cold War ended, we came into a period of vacuum somehow. First we had Professor Fukuyama saying this is the end of history, because now the liberal democracy has won the Cold War, and we can all together work on creating a world of liberal democracy. But then just a few years later came Huntington and said we will not clash of guns. And of course, 9/11 in 2001 and the Iraq War and the war on terrorism, etc., has kind of confirmed that we have some very strong polarizations in the world, and that has only increased, rather unfortunately not been reduced. So there is this need, and this was clear from since about 20 years ago. And you see that many nations, particularly young nations, are focusing quite a lot on this, not least on one of my specialties, namely nation branding. You know, new nations have to be discovered somehow. They have to come on the map somehow. And how do you do this? Well, you do this mainly with software. You show that you have interest and attractive culture, that you have an interesting society, interesting for cultural tourism, etc., so this has become the only country which is really not at all doing anything for cultural diplomacy or for nation branding, is the United States itself. It has, if you look at our cultural budgets, for instance, I think Lithuania has about, more or less like Sweden and Germany, around 1% of your state budget. State budget is on culture, but in the United States it's 0.05%. So it's almost nothing, and they don't have a minister of culture. So all this is kind of left to let's say the market and all the strong actors, Disney and Hollywood and Warner and Google and Apple, etc. And so they do the job, and the state doesn't have to. So culture diplomacy is at the same time is all of this. It is also what Google is doing and Apple is doing, Facebook is doing, but it is also what the government is doing, and it is what you and me are doing right now. It's an exchange where we try to understand each other and to send certain messages in a soft way and without, let's say, evil intentions.
So the ACP is very big cultural diplomacy project. Do you think so?
Oh yes, I could say it is. It is one way of doing cultural diplomacy, absolutely, and I think it's a rather good way.
If I may ask about a historical event in Berlin, in the parliament, last Sunday on the February 27th, Scholz gave a very, I would say, paradigmatically new kind of speech, encouraging Germany not only to send defensive weapons to Ukraine, but also to increase militarization of Germany, which after the Second World War II is a huge paradigmatic shift in self-defense policy, and his speech was accepted with applause. However, some politicians were more reserved and they did not applaud, but only some. I wonder, is it because before the war in Ukraine, Germany's militarization up to today's standards, especially to counter Russians' capabilities, as Scholz said, we have to measure what are Russian military capabilities and what are German military capabilities? Are we capable of defending ourselves? And before the war in Ukraine, it seemed like it's politically incorrect to talk like this because of German history. And now Germany, after all the effort to be a peaceful promoting country, to be politically correct, after all the guilt acceptance of the World War II, I think it's very correct and right to make this paradigmatic shift. However, what is the feeling in Germany among intellectuals, among people of culture and perhaps politicians about this big shift? Or perhaps it takes more time to kind of to reflect on that speech and new policy.
Yeah, as you say, it is really a paradigm shift, and it was rather sensational because until just one day before, even the foreign minister and others, they were saying, okay, we are supporting and supporting, but weapons will not be exported to a country fighting a war. So this was a complete shift. And I think he was reading the public opinion, including most of the cultural society in Germany. He was reading this very well and seeing this. The sympathies for Ukraine here are so big that it was impossible to continue to say no to Zelensky's request for more concrete assistance. And of course, it is sensational because there have been opportunities earlier where you could have said that perhaps German military equipment could also have been well at place. But they have stuck to this. As you know, Germany, I've written some books about that. Germany are some world champions in going back to their history and accusing everybody in their own country who did all these crimes, committed all these crimes during this terrible 12-year period in the 20th century. And so they have, and that is goes so deep into the German soul that they have found it impossible to make any sort of indication that they would take some sort of military role. You may remember perhaps when Germany said no to joining George W. Bush for the invasion in Iraq in 2003. George W. Bush, when asked about this at a press conference where they asked him, how can it be that the close ally Germany is not joining you, Mr. President, in this invasion? Well, Bush had to say, after some hesitation, well, you know, the Germans are pacifists. And somehow that was, of course, a sensational statement because for many Americans and British and so on, Germany has been the symbol of militarism and aggression, etc., etc. So, but they have really completely changed their image. And you will also remember when Germany was united, and since in 1990, since then, it has been very clear for almost all German politicians to say our identity is rather European than German. So you find hardly any country in Europe where the European issue has such a strong priority. And that is also has also to do with history. But now we have a new situation. Where a neighboring country is attacked by another neighboring country, and that is shocking everybody so much that the Bundeskanzler, he had to make this turn. And I think I know that some people in the AfD and the right-wing extremist party are against it. I think that very few people in the cultural life are against this decision.
Yeah, it's looks very strange, you know, this peacefulness of Germany before Scholz, because it looks like they, you know, feel responsibility. They feel full responsibility for the Second World War from the Nazi side, but they didn't feel any responsibility about Stalinism. You know, they considered themselves like far away, and even that they didn't need and don't need to fight with Stalinism as the other, you know, terrible issue. This is why Baltic countries never could understand this peacefulness of Germany and couldn't accept this peacefulness, because for us it was quite clear, you know, that okay, Nazis, Hitler, you know, fascism, Mussolini, everything is very bad, you know, and you need to compete to fight against them, to stop them. But from the other side, there is the other issue, the other power of totalitarian and authoritarian, which is equal to the Hitler side. And now it looks like that Germany's wake up after 40 years of sleeping, you know, and started to understand that they are not fully responsible from about everything what's happened bad in Europe. That there is the other force equal to Nazi, equal to Stalin, and that they are responsible as well for the stopping of this evil, you know, which comes from Ural Mountains and the Moscow Kremlin, you know. And do you see here the changes in cultural policy as well? Because you mentioned that these accusations, self-accusations, you know, of Germany, you know, and finding enemies between themselves, you know, became some kind of tradition, instead of to understand the world evil processes, you know, the authoritarian and totalitarian power. Do you see the possibility for changes of Germans' cultural policy and culture?
Well, on this, I think you're right, of course, that the German, particularly the East Germans, of course, they lived with Stalin and then Khrushchev and Brezhnev and so on. And somehow this is, well, I guess this is a dilemma which has not yet been quite solved for Germany. Of course, you could say that the unification in 1990 means that the West German system was the victor and took over. And more or less took over East Germany as well. But you will see that from a, let's say, general cultural point of view, East Germans are, the extremist party AfD has its most members and sympathizers in East Germany, for the kind of reasons that you were referring to, that they have not really been able to look into the crimes of the GDR regime during these 40 years. There is something which the Germans call nostalgia. Elderly persons who are a little bit nostalgic about the East German system and this SED. That is a phenomenon which you cannot completely neglect in German politics and culture. It is still there. You might say it is going to disappear more or less with the generations, but you can find this kind of traits among people who say, well, we had the kindergartens, the West didn't have that, and we had nice communities and so on. And if we were not politically active, after all, we had a rather good time. So it's a tendency to a little bit to play down the cruelties of that system. So I think there is still a difference between Western Germany and Eastern Germany about these issues. I have many friends in Cologne and Munich and so on who has still never been to Dresden or Leipzig. And you have, on the other hand, certainly some East Germans who have hardly been to Munich or Düsseldorf. So it's 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, but the wall is a little bit still in the souls of the Germans. As far as cultural life is concerned, we have to, I think, establish that there was one thing about the GDR. They had some very good musicians and very good film artists and so on, and they have been very well integrated in the United Germans' cultural life. I think in cultural life, the divisions are more or less gone, and of course, younger people are more integrated with each other, and you don't find any nostalgia among young artists or intellectuals in East Germany.
Tommy?
Well, thank you very much for such illuminating answers and providing us important aspects on how culture and politics are interwoven today. And we heard some possibilities how we can help Russian artists, Russian intellectuals to preserve Russian soul in spite of the evil of Putin, who is demonstrating so much cruelty against the Slavic nation, Ukraine. Thank you very much, Karl-Erik. With you was me, Tomas Kavaliauskas, and Professor Gintautas Mažeikis from Kaunas University, Social and Political Critique Center. And this is the program, Freely and Critically. So thank you very much, and hope to meet you again.